Vidmori POV. Your son? Chris asked, more than a little uncertain as he watched Freyli bring her paws up to Basmori's shoulders, standing on her rear paws and resting her chin against the top of his head, while she audibly rumbled with delight. Of course, can't you tell? He's obviously inherited my good looks, I mused, gently patting Freyli's head while she doted on her brother. Though, now that I said that, I do see some of my own features on him, and I can only say this with any real certainty, thanks to the dream walking I had done with Rayvir and Rita, and the time I spent walking through the memories of my childhood. He's got my nose, and I'm almost certain he's got my chin as well. Whether that just happened to be a quirk of coincidence, or if Basmori really decided to model himself after me, I don't care. He's my handsome little guy regardless. I'm sorry, but how? Wasn't he just your familiar? Chris asked, looking even more uncertain as he walked closer to us while looking over Basmori with a healthy amount of curiosity. Basmori glanced up at me as well, wondering how I was going to explain this. He was a little worried too, since he felt that he was causing me unnecessary trouble. I just smiled a little more and gently poked Basmori's cheek before looking at Chris again. Well, I'm not about to explain how I've been travelling with my son and daughter while they look like beasts. Wouldn't that be confusing? I asked, which earned an obligatory nod from Chris. As for why they're like this, well, you're gonna have to ask their mother. She handles their training as she's rather Spartan in her methods. I could tell several things confused him as he looked between me, the cubs, and Lugosi, who had also hopped onto the bed at this point and comfortably relaxed there. I'm sorry, Freyli is also your daughter, and you have a wife who you had kids with, and what does Spartan mean? He asked, doing his best to maintain his professionalism despite all the new information coming his way, before glancing over at Lugosi curiously. Are you also a person? Lugosi just put on a wolfish smile as his tail slowly swayed behind him. Maybe. I'm not sure yet, he teased kindly, before resting his head along his forepaws. I couldn't help but chuckle at Lugosi's response as I regarded Chris again. I needed to come up with a good story. Sure, I may have been playing along because I was in such a good mood, but this likely wouldn't make sense to most people, so I need to somehow be convincing. Let's start by just answering his questions one at a time. Yes, Freyli and Basmori are my children. I do have more, but these two stowed away when I left my trip, I mentioned, poking both Freyli and Basmori's cheeks as the two siblings shared a small but mischievous grin. This earned a small nod from Chris, who still looked a little confused by the fact that Basmori was now a child instead of a cub, but I continued anyway. As for that wife comment, well, not yet, I mentioned with a bit of a smile. We're still dating, though she is my partner and I consider her to be my right hand. There's no one else I trust in this world more than I trust her. At that, I glanced at Freyli and Basmori before looking back to Chris. And no, I didn't have kids out of wedlock or anything like that. They're not my flesh and blood, but I've known them their whole lives and consider them to be mine regardless. I could feel that last comment struck a chord with Chris as he considered his own home life, and the father who abandoned him and his sister. He just gave me a little nod, finding a seat on the arm of the couch in the sitting area, as he intently listened to what else I had to say. In regards to what Spartan means, well, that's just a very specific style of training. However, as the idea comes to mind, I have a realization that I could work with this line of thought, now that I'm putting it into words. I couldn't help but let a small smile creep on my lips as I start to bullshit my cubs and Basti's backstories. They come from a reclusive clan of beastkin shapeshifters who usually keep to themselves for the most part. Chris's eyes widened with interest and surprise, his fluffy foxtail swishing while ears perked at attention. Shapeshifters, really? I've heard about people with that kind of ability, but I've never met one in person, he mentioned, his mind wandering to various rumour mills that he was aware of talking about this and that, before regarding Basori curiously. He actually believed that? Not to mention there are really shapeshifters out there? I do my best to maintain a more neutral expression and nodding. Yes, and the clan call themselves Romans, and wherever they stay they call their territory Rome, since they're always on the move, never truly staying in one place for all too long. The warriors of their clan are called Spartans, and their training is so difficult that it is usually used as a means to describe how difficult things can be. Chris nodded along, seeming more and more intrigued with the utter bullshit I was spouting, before looking Basori and Fraley over curiously. So why have they been acting as cubs the entire time? I understand wanting to keep a low profile, but wouldn't it be more comfortable for your kids to move around as beastkin, instead of their shifted forms? At that, I just smiled a bit, before gently patting Fraley's head, as she audibly rumbled and purred with delight. More comfortable, yes. However, they can't shift back until they're able to overcome the curse placed on them by their mother for their training, I explain, as I gesture over to Basori. While fighting by my side this morning, Basori had a breakthrough, and was able to finally break the curse, allowing him to shift back into a beastskin. Whoa, a curse? That's rough, he murmured contemplatively, his mind again wandering back to memories of rumour mills and the like, though he does briefly consider a guild member he knew that got cursed by some kind of trap, before shuddering as he tried to block out the memory before he thought too much about it. But to curse your own kids? How long have they been like that? He asked with rather genuine concern. I smiled a little more, appreciating how worried he was about my string of lies. It's only been a few months. It's done when they come of age and they have to learn how to harness their mana heart to their fullest in order to break the force shifting, I said, as I looked to Fraley and then back at Basori again. As of right now, Basori is the first of his siblings to reach this stage, though I'm sure it's only a matter of time until the others are able to do the same. Damn, that's rather impressive, he considered, before looking at Basori, and I could tell he was experimentally tapping into our shared bond to try and gauge his strength, when his ears twitched with surprise. By the gods, that little kid is stronger than me, and he managed to keep up with you and fight at your side? He asked rhetorically before just shaking his head. The world is so unfair at times. I just chuckled a little bit before regarding Chris again. Well, my kid's got an early start. You're only just going down that sort of path. Don't worry. If you really want to get stronger, then just stick with me and I'll definitely help you along your way. As Chris goes to speak, I suddenly get a flash of memories that weren't my own. Just taking a moment to focus on them, I peer into their last moment to see Greed cornering someone in the woods, before plunging a sword into their chest, while maintaining the most cold-blooded eye contact, as he watched the life fade from their eyes. Well, I suppose whatever he's doing, he managed to win out in the end. I haven't gotten any messages from the sinners since I set out, so I just have to hope that whatever they're up to, it hadn't needed my direct intervention or advice. Vito, did you hear what I said? Chris asked, and it was only then that I realized I was so focused on the memories that just came my way that I didn't pay attention to what he was saying. Ah, sorry about that. I just got a message from one of my subordinates and it was a little overstimulating, I explained, while waving my hand rather dismissively. Chris looked at me curiously before tilting his head, while his ears flicked in thought. That reminds me, I noticed some of your other people were also in town. How many people do you have bonds with? Oh, you're talking about Wither and Blight, right? I asked, though I could tell he didn't know their names. Those are their names? Really? It seems rather contrary to being healers, Chris asked skeptically, while tilting his head again, which made his ears slightly flop. I just grinned at that before shrugging a bit. I don't actually know their names, that's just the monikers they go by, and they haven't needed to introduce themselves to me since they've started working for me. In the meantime, it hasn't compromised their ability to heal, and I don't mind either way. Chris nodded in understanding once I said that, something clicking and fitting in place as he listened. Ah, I see. So they're also travelling under a false name, he asked, and I could tell he was referring to me when he said also. Oh, so you figured out Vito isn't my real name? Good on you, I mused, though I suddenly got the impression that Lugosi was feeling vaguely distressed for some reason. Chris just flashed a little grin, as his ears waggled from my comment. Oh, it was nothing difficult. Lugosi over there was just a little too earnest when referring to you. I suppose he isn't used to using your alias. I just chuckled softly, glancing over to Lugosi and smiling a little more. It's okay, Lugosi. I suppose it isn't that big of a secret since he's working with us now. Though with that, I looked over at Chris and smirked almost mischievously. That doesn't mean I intend on telling you my real name anytime soon. Not that you would even know who I am, regardless if you knew or not. Chris just offered a small shrug before smiling a little, as his tail swished slowly behind him. It doesn't matter to me. You could be a devil for all I care. You've given my sister a second chance at life and possibly more. For that, my life is yours. I was a little taken aback by that sudden tangent, but I could tell he meant every word of it, despite his nonchalance. Well, I'll be mindful to make sure you live a long and happy one if that's the case. Both you and your sister deserve that much, I offer with a smile, before remembering something and smiling a bit. By the way, the elite of this village are holding a feast in my honor, and to celebrate their survival today. While I'm not sure how big the event is going to be, they are inviting me and all those I consider to be my people to celebrate with them. Chris looked fairly intrigued by that comment, but then he quickly realized something as his ears perked at attention. Wait, you're saying we're invited to this feast too? I nodded once as I looked Chris over. I'm sure the dress code doesn't really matter much, but I suppose you, your sister, and your team ought to clean up as best as you can. I believe they also mentioned they would provide us with rooms to stay in, so be sure to spread the word to the others, I said before smirking a little. Also be mindful about your friend's sticky fingers. It'll be a bit too obvious if things go missing, after spending a night as a guest here. Chris was rather surprised at the idea of enjoying a feast held by elites. His mind first going to his sister getting to enjoy a meal they could only dream of, and sleeping in rooms filled with things they could likely never afford. Though at the mention of his team, Chris couldn't help but look vaguely indignant, opening his mouth to reply with some sort of snide comment, before taking a moment to think on it. Actually, you might be right about that, he admitted, as he scratched the back of his head. Anyway, thanks for bringing Lugosi and Fraley over. You should probably head back to the others to let them know what's happening tonight, I mentioned, as I walked towards the double doors to my room. Chris nodded dutifully, getting up from the arm of the couch as he followed me to the door. Right, of course, boss, he said simply, and soon made his way out as I locked the door behind him. Now on my own again, I looked over to Lugosi, only to find that he was sound asleep. I could tell that he was rather exhausted after everything that happened today, and once he was laying in the bed, there was little to keep him from dozing off. Now looking over to Basori, I watched as he suddenly engulfed himself in shadow, shifting back into being a cub, as he gently roughhoused with Fraley, rolling her off of his back while he hopped across the plush bed. Fraley, for her part, just laughed with delight as she rolled across the sheets before bounding after him along the massive bed. Now then, what am I going to do with you? I mused to Basori. The cub in turn looking up at me curiously, before being tackled by Fraley the next moment since he wasn't paying attention. I couldn't help but chuckle at the scene as I sat on the bed, the cubs quickly wrestling between each other to see who would make it on my lap first. Despite now being the less powerful of the two, Fraley managed to slip past Basori by bouncing off his back before claiming her victory and settling on my lap as she mischievously lashed her tail behind her. Basori, for his part, looked vaguely annoyed before smirking as the shadows engulfed him, shifting back into a beastkin and looking as smug as could be about it while sticking out his tongue at her. Watching him change between forms, I wondered how he got so used to easily using his shadowy wings as a storage space, as I could see him magically pulling my poncho around his body before letting the shadows retreat to his back. As Basori stuck his tongue out at Fraley just settled into my lap, scooting around and getting cozy despite Basmori's taunts. "You two are hilarious," I mused softly, rubbing Fraley's back before reaching out and patting Basmori's hair. "Well, now that I've told our group that you guys are my kids and not my familiars, I've got to start presenting you as my kids around here at least." "Can I talk more?" Fraley asked curiously, as she looked up at me with a charming feline smile. Though at my words, Basori started to wither a bit, as his mind wandered to the kids back at the Haven, and the idea of wearing proper clothes and eating using his hands instead of just his mouth. I chuckled softly for a moment as I gently patted the top of Fraley's head. I don't see why not. At least around here it shouldn't draw too much attention after making it known. Though I then looked over at Basori and gently poked his forehead. "And yes, you have the right idea. We're gonna need to get you some clothes and you're likely going to have to eat like a person. But don't worry, I'll help you with that for sure." Basmori's rounded ears sagged a little at the prospect of playing at being a person, though he then looked over his hands and flexed his fingers, clenching and unclenching his hands as he made little fists, his thoughts going to Basti as he watched her training to act like a human. "That's right, you're just like Basti now. Sure, you still need to train, but you can hold your head up high now that you've managed to follow her path," I explained enthusiastically, doing my best to really sell the idea of acting like a person now that he's got the ability to shapeshift. "You can make a good person," Fraley added encouragingly, smiling more sincerely with her adorable little feline face. Basori still looked just a little unsure, but after a minute or so of thought, he simply huffed and nodded, just accepting his fate on having to wear proper clothes. "Glad to see you're on board. Now then, where to find clothes?" I considered aloud while stroking my chin, my eyes wandering over to the cord that dangled from the ceiling. "I suppose if you need something, it's best to ask those who would know where to find it," I commented for the cubs, while reaching out and gently tugging on the cord as the faint bell sounded off in the distance.